Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to Eye of the Beholder, where we take a 20-year look at the Dungeons & Dragons miniatures produced by WOTC and WizKids between 2003 and 2023. We continue our review of the Monstrosity minis, picking things back up with the G's. Let's get to it. Gem Stalkers are some weird combination of centaurs and gem dragons. They even come in the same 5 gem types as their dragon distant cousins. They don't have a breath weapon, but do have special abilities tied to their gem type. Nor do they use weapons, preferring to attack with 4 claws at once. Fun fact, Gem Stalkers can take on damage done to their allies onto themselves, which makes them great allies to have around.
Our only Gem Stalker mini comes from 2022's Fizban's Treasury of Dragons set. It was one of the 8 huge special miniatures that came in the set. Purple is the color of choice here. Dark purple for the body and a lighter purple for the spikes on the back. Black claws complete the look. Pose has him on alert, arms away from the body with claws poised to strike. We don't get much in the way of facial detail in here, but the muscle definition, particularly on the chest, is impressive. Finally, note the purple gem embedded in his chest. Score: Paint 16, Pose 15, Playability 13, Pizzazz 16 for a score of 60.
When a regular gorilla just isn't threatening enough, add a second pair of arms, make it super aggressive and territorial, mix well, and voila, you have the gorillan. Like gorillas, they tend to live in groups under a dominant adult and, as mentioned, furiously defend their territory against all comers. For fun, drop a pack of these on your PCs while they trek through the wilderness setting and watch the fun.
WizKids gives us our first gorillan in 2006's War Drum set. Called a fiendish gorillan, despite being set on the smaller, large-based WotC used back in the day, it's my favorite of the gorillan minis. Pose perfectly captures the essence of the creature, posed with fangs bared, upper arms raised as if to beat his chest, gorilla style, with lower arms stretching away from the body. Paint is a bluish-white with a generous dark washing to highlight the fur, with a brown face for contrast. Score? Yeah, 100. Two years later, we get this gorillan in 2008's Demon Web set. To me, it's a step back, especially as a rare. I'm not fond of the pose, crouching to the point of sitting on its haunches, the lower arms set tight to the body while the upper pair are raised high above his head. And while it's definitely bigger than the War Drums version, it's just not as impressive. The white fur is nicely detailed though. Score: Paint 14, Pose 16, Playability 14, Pizzazz 14 for a score of 58. Our only WizKids gorillan mini comes from the Tomb of Annihilation set of 2017. It is physically smaller than both WotC versions, exacerbated by the fact that it's leaning far forward with one of its arms touching the ground. Pretty decent fur detailing on the body despite the lack of a dark wash, and WizKids changes it up with brown feet, arms, chest, and face. Pose is suitably aggressive with one arm raised to strike, but the lower pair of arms do kind of disappear into the body. Score: Paint 15, Pose 18, Playability 16, Pizzazz 13 for a score of 62.
Gorgons are bull-like creatures that, due to their metallic hides, look like constructs. Fun fact, they used to be considered constructs in the early version of Z&D. Like a bull in his field, they are very territorial and attack on sight via trample and horn. If that doesn't work, they also have a breath weapon to fall back on that turns anyone caught in the cloud to stone.
WotC gives us our only Gorgon in this rare from 2007's Unhallowed set. A monochrome silver is it for color, that has been perfectly dark washed to bring out the details of the plated body. Pose slightly crouched with the head turned to the left and tail raised high. There's an interesting detail of a ring in its nose, which doesn't make sense, as no one has figured out how to domesticate these beasts. WizKids needs to make a Gorgon Mini, preferably with a translucent green gas cloud emanating from its mouth. Score: Paint 17, Pose 17, Playability 20, Pizzazz 21, for a score of 75.
The Gromeshka is a tiny monstrosity about the size of a house cat that eats magic. They are the bane of spellcasters, good and evil alike, as they will hungrily devour spell components and chew through spell books with relish. Also, their body reacts to magic spells cast near them, sometimes creating a blast of energy, sometimes healing them, and in worst case for wizards, sometimes splitting into multiple Gromeshkas.
We get our only Gromeshka Mini in 2022's Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft set. Brown head, back and legs, with a light brown underbelly. It clutches a bone in its mouth, or perhaps a scroll. There's not really much to say about this Mini, with its most noticeable feature being the long bat-like ears. It is a common, which does make it useful when it splits. Score: Paint 12, Pose 12, Playability 15, Pizzazz 12, for a score of 51.
Upon first running into a Grick, PCs might mistake it for a giant earthworm. Then, the front of the worm opens up to expose 4 barbed tentacles surrounding an octopus-like beak. Gricks are always hungry. If it moves, it's food. They do hunt in packs, flanking their prey when possible, which includes hanging from the walls if necessary. Fun fact: despite their worm-like appearance, Gricks will defend their nest furiously if it is threatened.
WOTC gives us our first Grick in 2004's Giants of Legend set, and like the Gorlin previously, the first one is the best of the bunch. Its brown upper body would be perfect camouflage in the dark, with the lighter brown underbelly offering a nice contrast. The wide open face, with its tentacles spread wide, is amazing. Each sucker is perfectly detailed. And it's a common to boot, making it easy to get a bunch to make up your Grick pack. Score: Paint 25, Pose 22, Playability 23, Pizzazz 19, for a score of 89. Four years later, WOTC gives us a second Grick in 2008's Dungeons of Dread set, and it's definitely a step back. I like that they tried something different by going with a blue-brown for the body color, but the pose is certainly nothing special, and the fact that it's much smaller than the Giants of Legend version works against it as well. It is a common, so there's that. I guess you can use them as Grick wormlings. Score: Paint 14, Pose 12, Playability 13, Pizzazz 12, for a score of 51. What the actual frick, WizKids? Are you kidding me with this one? From the Monster Menagerie 2 set, we get this mini Grick, pun intended. I mean, it's fine paint and pose-wise, but it's so small. I mean, you could use it for a wormling, but here's the catch. It's a rare. So yeah, instead of getting a menacing beholder, or a majestic dragon, or a terrifying vampire in the rare slot, we get Pee-wee here. Score: Paint 13, Pose 12, Playability 10, Pizzazz 5, for a score of 40.
Griffins can be found in Greek, Egyptian, and Persian mythology. They have the body and rear legs of a lion, and the wings, foreclaws, and heads of an eagle. Somewhat intelligent, if not aggressive, especially around horses, which is their favorite food. They are highly prized as mounts. Check out this sneak peek. Definitely one of my favorites. Grick eggs and hatchlings can be sold on the open market for thousands of gold pieces. Once trained, they make for very loyal and fierce mounts.
WOTC gives us our first griffin in the Death Knell set of 2005, and it's about as perfect of an example of what this creature is. The tawny brown of the lion's body nicely contrasts with the darker brown of the wings and claws. Posed with one foreclaw raised and talons extended, while the head has a slight tilt to the right. Solid detailing on the face, with the open beak, and the feather and detail on the wings is quite nice, especially for a rare early mini. Score: Paint 22, Pose 24, Playability 20, Pizzazz 21, for a score of 87. Three years later, WOTC gives us a second griffin in 2008's Dungeons of Dread set. Here, they use clever positioning of the wings to ground the mini to the base, yet still give the illusion of flight, and without the flimsy plastic stand. Smaller and not quite as detailed as the first effort, this one is mostly brown, which lightens a bit on the underside of the wings. To me, this one seems more of a wild griffin, nesting on a rocky peak, soaring in the winds. Score: Paint 15, Pose 22, Playability 20, Pizzazz 17, for a score of 74. A year later, we get our final WOTC Griffin in 2009's Monster Manual Legendary Evil set. Called a Rhymefire Griffin, this guy obviously prefers a colder environment, although, based on the name, maybe he lairs near an active volcano for warmth. The shiny white with a hint of blue on the wings and body would be perfect camouflage against an icy background, while the blue-white underside of the wings makes for a strong contrast. He is posed with wings unfurled as he stares intently forward with his yellow eyes. Score: Paint 16, Pose 20, Playability 16, Pizzazz 25, for a score of 77. WizKids' first foray into Griffindom comes in their second set, 2015's Elemental Evil. Here we get a fully airborne version with a clear base that is surprisingly stable considering the height. Similar in coloring to the first WOTC Griffin, but here we get yellow foreclaws and beak, and the head of a bald eagle with its white feathering. As an uncommon, it probably isn't hard to get a couple of these as a mated pair, enhancing playability, especially when combined with what's coming up next. Score: Paint 24, Pose 24, Playability 22, Pizzazz 20, for a score of 90. Check out this adorable little Griffin hatchling mini from 2021's Snowbound set. 2 or 3 of these along with the pair of Elemental Evil Griffins before, and you got yourself a very cool wilderness encounter, with the PCs battling the parents for the right to claim the hatchlings, which, at 5K a pop, isn't jump change. Detailing is not bad for such a small mini. We even get a couple eye specks and a yellow beak. Score: Paint 13, Pose 13, Playability 20, Pizzazz 13, for a score of 59. Remember when I mentioned Greek mythology? You know what that means. Odysseys of Theros time. From 2020, we get this absolutely spectacular griffin miniature. The fully outstretched, two-tone wings are magnificently detailed, each feather easily distinguishable. This one has obviously been domesticated. Note the long purple cloak flowing down its back and the golden torque and foreclaw bands. Mounted on a low base, to me, it looks like he's coming in for a landing. Score, if you haven't guessed already, 100.
Gullvorgs are believed to be created by goblin alchemists, perhaps from wargs. They certainly share the dim cunning and cruelness of their warg cousins, but with a set of fangs that rival that of a Tyrannosaurus. They are exceptional trackers and ruthless defenders when tamed. Fun fact, left to their own devices, they are ferociously antagonistic amongst themselves, but tolerate wargs to the point of protecting them, almost as their pups.
WOTC gives us our only Gullvorg in 2008's Against the Giants set. Called an armored Gullvorg for obvious reasons, this obviously domesticated beast sports spiked plate mail running down his back, as well as plates covering the front of all four limbs. He's also bigger and broader than the book art, so obviously well fed. Posed slightly crouched and the oversized fangs clearly displayed, while the bladed tail sweeps forward. From what we can see of the body, the blue fur is nicely done. Score: Pain 18, Pose 18, Playability 13, Pizzazz 21 for a score of 70.
As I've said before, where would D&D be without Greek mythology? Harpies, also known as sirens, are hateful, malignant creatures who delight in the misery of others. Not particularly strong, nor possessing weapons other than bone clubs and crude knives, they have a far more deadly weapon. They use their siren song to lure travelers to their doom. Once under its thrall, a victim will passively approach the harpy and basically allow it to kill him.
We get our first harpy in WOTC's second set, 2003's Dragon Eye. Brown of body and wings, she wields a bone club in her right hand. Crouched low as if in preparation to spring in the air, which is kind of a shame, as it somewhat conceals the great facial detail on this mini, particularly the malicious grin. The upswept dew is also an interesting choice. Score: Paint 13, Pose 15, Playability 13, Pizzazz 13 for a score of 54. Yes, there are male harpies, which this miniature from 2007's Desert of Desolation set appears to be. Harpies are usually nude, but this one rocks a reddish loincloth, so we can't be sure, but the torso does suggest maleness. The brown body is nicely detailed, as are the gray wings, albeit more bird-like than leathery. Another gruesome visage greets us here, mouth open and fangs bared, and he must go to the same hairdresser as the last one. Score: Paint 13, Pose 12, Playability 13, Pizzazz 13 for a score of 51. WOTC goes all out in their final Harpy miniatures. From 2009's Monster Manual Dangerous Delve set, we get this beauty. Eschewing the Lady Godiva look, she is wearing a plain blue shift over her brown body. With wings that are set upward and slightly cupped, she is posed as if about to launch herself skyward, nice touch adding a bit of rock outcropping to the base to act as her launching pad. Not much in the way of facial features, but I do like the pebbling on the lower legs above her talons. Score: Paint 14, Pose 18, Playability 15, Pizzazz 17 for a score of 64. WizKids gives us their first Harpy, which is also our first fully airborne version. It's from 2015's Tyranny of Dragons set, and well, it's not great. Dark brown wings against a creamy colored body is it for color, and detailing is subpar, especially for a rare. The facial detailing is especially poor, which I suppose is okay, as the pose basically makes the face moot. Honestly, other than it's posed in full flight, it's not a lot to recommend in this one. Score: Paint 10, Pose 12, Playability 13, Pizzazz 9 for a score of 44. As with the Griffins, you know you're going to get a Harpy in 2020's Mythic Odyssey of Theros set. The catch here is that she's a named miniature. Meet Euphemia, the Dissonant Song, which is such a cool title. Here, the sturdy translucent stand allows her to be posed as if swooping down on her prey, wings fully extended and talons ready to strike. And what beautiful wings they are, glossy black with streaks of blue on the underside. The face conveys Edward Munchen's famous painting, The Scream. Score: Paint 17, Pose 22, Playability 20, Pizzazz 25, for a score of 84. Our final Harpy comes in 2023's Sand and Stone set. As portraying Harpies as they are described as most definitely not safe for work, we again get her in a blue dress to cover her body. As expected, the cream-colored legs end in wicked-looking talons, while her brown hair matches the wings. Another in-flight pose, this mini has probably the finest facial detailing of the bunch. Note to WizKids, you really need to release some common Harpies. Making them all rares makes it really hard to get a proper flock, also known as a gaggle. Score: Paint 15, Pose 16, Playability 17, Pizzazz 16, for a score of 64.
I was planning on finishing up with the H's, but I think this is a good place to stop. I try to keep the videos at around 20 minutes or less, but if I continue on reviewing the Hippogriff, Hook Horror, and Hydra miniatures, I'm looking at 30 minutes plus. So long for now. Thanks as always for watching Eye of the Beholder. All comments are appreciated.